Hi, in this session of Immigration Live, I'd like to discuss the administration's June announcement of a denaturalization task force. Again, this is one of those issues that it seems has gone under the radar. Most of the media publicity has gone towards other immigration issues, but some of those that are affecting those who have legally immigrated or those who have tried to legally immigrate, as I've discussed in my recent sessions of tips and tidbits, have gone under the radar. And so I'd like to make sure that you fully understand and appreciate what's at stake with this program. Essentially, there are 20 million United States naturalized citizens that are suddenly at risk due to the administration's recent announcement. The government announced that it is going to spend upwards of $207 million on a denaturalization task force. They're going to add at least 300 agents specifically dedicated to work on this task force. And they're going to add tons of immigration staffers, such as investigators and paralegals, to help with the process. The idea is that the government or that the Trump administration wants to look at those who have naturalized because they believe there's been a lot of hanky-panky in the process. You know, when I think about citizenship, I think about my father. And so when I talk to clients from the very outset, I always bring up the final frontier, that moving to citizenship, naturalizing, is moving to the final frontier of immigration. And then that no one should stop their efforts to become a full-fledged participant in this society without naturalizing, which is why I call it the final frontier. In the past, there weren't a real fear about people being naturalized once they became a United States citizens, because they had to go through various processes and they had to spend certain times under scrutiny by the government to get to that level. Now, it's like a double jeopardy type of situation. Their situation is going to be looked at again. The final frontier is not so final anymore. The final frontier, citizenship, is not so permanent anymore. I was at, I went to a restaurant the other day. I took a client who had just won her citizenship. And so we were celebrating. I was treating her to lunch, her and her family to lunch. And the owner came out and I told him, hey, you know, I'd like to introduce you to this person. It's a brand new citizen. And he was real joyful. And the first thing that he mentioned to her was that make sure you register to vote. And that is one of the greatest thrills that my father had, and that I can recall growing up, is every election he was sure to vote, because that was one of the differences between citizenship in this country and citizenship elsewhere, because of the promises of democracy, free elections, fair elections. That was very important to him. I also wrote an article, if you recall, perhaps about a month ago, on the amount of permanent residents that do not become citizens, which I think is a real danger. And now, and I wrote that slightly before the announcement of the task force. So now this is really something that I think everyone that is a permanent resident or everyone hoping to become a permanent resident looks into. I also mentioned last week in my tips and tidbits session the announcement of the notice to appear policy by USCIS. And that's the agency that will evaluate the citizenship application, and how they were given the power now to just outright deny applications and immediately refer someone to immigration court. Someone that files for citizenship is at that moment a permanent resident. Otherwise, they couldn't apply for citizenship. So if they're denied right then and there, they'll be sent to immigration court. And I think all of these policies come together in the mindset of the current administration as a way to restrict legal immigration. In fact, I was listening to the recent press conference with Sarah Huckabee, the president's spokesperson, media spokesperson. And when she talked about the task force, she mentioned how the immigration system is broken. I agree with that, no doubt about that. Then she mentioned, and that's why we need this task force, and we need to move to a merit-based program. A merit-based program. That is, again, moving America away from a family-based approach to a merit-based approach, which will definitely affect who can apply and who can win the citizenship, who can survive the naturalization process. Certainly, this is part, I believe, of a very dangerous, slippery slope, not just a legal one, but a political one. And that this is why I believe I had to go on the air and discuss this with you, because it threatens to undermine how many people go forward to become citizens, which plays right into the administration's hand, because a permanent resident is a lot more easily deported than a citizen is of being denaturalized. And secondly, it also threatens to undermine the naturalization system. So let's talk about what are the ostensible goals. What did the administration say, or what is the administration thinking they're doing here? Well, there's three situations that they will be looking at. The first is prior criminal behavior that was concealed. Secondly, prior deportation cases where someone was deported and then they assumed fake identities to come back in another way, immigration-wise. And then material fraud and misrepresentation. And that, I believe, is the biggie. That is the biggest fear, I believe, for most of the naturalized citizens that could be at risk here. The first two goes, criminal conviction that was concealed. Hey, that's immigration fraud. Those individuals, oh, well, they should have known what they were doing. Individuals that were deported and then tried to come back in on another identity, oh, well, they committed a crime. They knew what they were doing. So, in fact, I had a fellow last summer came to my office to visit me. He had just been denied at his citizenship interview. He had been a green card holder since 1976. So he had renewed his card roughly 1986, 1996, 2006, 2016. So at least 4 times. 4 times after becoming a permanent resident, he renewed it. And now, with the fear of Trump, he decided, hey, I'm going to become a citizen. And of course, he didn't hire a lawyer. Oh no, lawyers are too expensive. So he went elsewhere to get his help. And what he didn't reveal to the person, it appears he didn't reveal to the person doing his paperwork, that in 1972, now he had arrived in the country first in 1970, and in 1972, 2 years later, he had been deported. So he came back in the country in 1973, 1974. He married a U.S. citizen. She petitioned him for permanent residency benefits. He won, and he went through the process, and he renewed and renewed, and he renewed and renewed. So he goes to the naturalization interview. And at the naturalization interview, they denied him. And they said, why? Well, because you lied on your application. And he was, how did I lie? Well, how did you get your green card? Well, through my wife. Well, how'd you get your green card if you were deported already? And at that moment, he woke up that he knew now the government had the technological capability to go backwards and pull old files and match records and pull out people that had committed fraud, that had come in under different identities or somehow managed to skirt through the system and then became permanent residents. And so here he was at his naturalization interview, and he was nailed. And they said to him, look, you didn't just commit fraud in 2017. You committed fraud in 1976, 1986, 1996, 2006, 2016, and twice this year. You signed the application under penalty of perjury. and you lied to our face today. This is the type of individual in terms of the fraud charges that the government's going to be looking at. And one of the reasons that they're able to do this is because of the technological improvements over the years. But the real danger, I believe, of the new policy, of the new program, is the third area of concern: material fraud and representation. Because the question is, what's material? That's subject to interpretation. In a recent Supreme Court case last summer, Chief Justice John Roberts called the government on that very issue. He said, is it material if someone drives 5 miles per hour over the speed limit, knowing they broke the law, or, they could be someone that, went through a red light. They committed a crime. They knew they broke the law, but they don't reveal that on an application. Would that be a material representation? And in that case, the Supreme Court tied down, in a sense, the violations that the government should be looking at when they look at this type of when they look at misrepresentations on naturalization applications, that it should be material. So the clear example given by Supreme Court Justice Roberts aside, I think there's a lot of gray areas that this administration can really put some innocent people at risk and make them jump through a lot of hoops to keep their citizenship status. In 1990, from 1990 to 2017, the statistics show that there have been 305 cases of denaturalization. Can you believe that? 305 cases of naturalization. That's what? 11 per year? At the end of the Obama administration, the denaturalization cases per year had gone up to 15, and immediately under Donald Trump, that was doubled. So it's not that there's been a wave of denaturalization cases that have caused the government to move in this direction. In fact, where the push really started was during the late days of the Bush administration. In 2008, a Border Patrol officer found that 200 people from 4 different countries had become United States citizens despite a prior deportation order. And he was able to find that because of the gradual improvement in computer technology and the ability to detect identity fraud. If you've gone to a recent USCIS interview, you now know that, the first thing they do is they'll, take an eye print. They're going to look at the individual's eyes and take that before they take a fingerprint. And both of those, because of the improved technology, they help them identify people more closely. Now, in 2008, the technology was just starting to improve. It was after 9/11, going way back to 2001, that the push came that, hey, we have to improve our records. By 2008, computer technology was coming around, but now, we're in 2018, 10 years later, and I'm on this video right now, so you know how well computer technology has improved. In 2008, the ability to do this, to talk to you live, to explain what's going on with this policy was almost nil. So there's been a lot of changes technologically wise. In 2011, the government appointed under President Obama a task force, and they estimated, there was suspicion, estimated that after looking through millions of files, they suspected that roughly 315,000 United States citizens may have had crimes that they didn't admit on their citizenship applications, or that they had prior deportation orders that they didn't reveal. That's not a definite figure. That was based on a mathematical calculation. And so at that point, the Obama administration ramped up an operation that they called Operation Janus. And from there, it's been alive, the idea of stripping individuals of their citizenship status with the government. And gradually it's increased, as I mentioned earlier, during the last year of the Obama administration, it had went up to 15. I mean, that's really not a lot. That's a little over one per month, but it is a lot more than the average for previous years. Now, here's my concern. And you can pull out a citizenship application, the N400, and I really want to draw your attention to question 22. Now, there are other items on that application. When you've come in the country, when you've left, the names of your spouses, family members, all of that is ripe for looking at, because there could be potential fraud committed there. But question 22 is the danger question, I think, for many individuals. And I'm going to quote that question right now. Have you ever committed, assisted in committing, or attempted to commit a crime or offense for which you were not arrested? Let me repeat that again. Have you ever committed, assisted in committing, or attempted to commit a crime or offense for which you were not arrested? Well, this is where I believe the government has a lot of wiggle room, despite the Supreme Court's concerns about what is a material misrepresentation. I was reading an article by a reporter where he had said that he was a naturalized citizen, but when he applied for citizenship, he was worried about revealing his sexual preferences. He was planning someday to marry someone of the same sex, and in his country, just the fact that he had those sexual preferences, he was committing a crime. And so he said he was in a quandary throughout the entire naturalization process as to whether he should reveal that as a crime for which he had not been arrested. He said he did reveal it, and so the new government policy wouldn't affect him because he admitted it. He added a page and he admitted that, and he was still approved eventually for citizenship. But it also shows another issue here, because a lot of individuals think that they don't have to reveal offenses or crimes committed in their home country. So that becomes a really tough issue here, because some people have committed offenses, and now the government's going to be looking at that. The case that has drawn the most attention on this comes out of Florida, and it's a woman by the name of Norma Borgano. She was from Peru and entered the United States in 1989. You may have heard about this case in the news. She was a secretary. She worked as a secretary for many years, and she had prepared paperwork for her boss. And at the time, her boss was doctoring loan applications, i.e. committing fraud. She was preparing the applications, and apparently she had a suspicion or knew what he was up to, but that was her job. In 2007, she applied for citizenship. Later in 2011, her boss, was charged with committing a crime. She was brought into court for conspiracy. She pled guilty, had a relatively minor punishment, 1 year house arrest and 4 years probation, 5 years or some restitution. But now the government says, wait a minute. You didn't reveal that offense when you applied for citizenship in 2007. So we're going to attempt to denaturalize you. We're going to attempt to strip your citizenship. We're going to attempt to deport you. I received a call a little while back from an individual who had went to a citizenship interview. And he had been given one of those NTAs to appear in immigration court. He didn't understand what was going on. And so we talked a little. And I found out that They denied him based on, they said, an incident in the 70s, and I believe it was 1972, um, where he had tried to smuggle someone into the United States, and he was caught at the border. So we discussed that. He goes, no. He goes, no, I was only stopped at the border one time in 1972. And so I inquired about that situation. And I said, well, did you bring anyone across with you? And he said, yes, sir. And I said, whom? He said, my wife. And I said, and your wife, what was her immigration status? He said she was a lawful permanent resident. I said, so you were a lawful permanent resident and she was a lawful permanent resident. So was there anybody else in the car? And he said, yes, my father-in-law. What was his immigration status? Well, he was a U.S. citizen. At the time you crossed the border? Yes. So was there anybody else in the car? No. So where's the fraud? He said, I don't know for sure, but I believe it comes down to the fact that when we were crossing the border, initially my wife said that she was a U.S. citizen in error. And they sent us to secondary. We cleared it up, and about an hour later, they released us. But now you were denied at the citizenship interview for that? Yes. This is the danger. This is the danger of this new naturalization task force. It is that type of error, that type of mistake that could lead people into fighting their naturalization case at court. And the way it works is that individuals, from what I understand, are going to be referred to the Office of Immigration Litigation, the U.S. Attorney's Office. And if they decide to proceed, there's going to be charges filed against the naturalized citizen in district court. Because you can only lose your citizenship through a judicial order, through a federal judge. And so you'll be presented with criminal charges, and then your civil charges, violation, and based on fraud, and you're going to have to defend yourself. And if you lose, you won't be immediately deportable, because you're going to be, if your citizenship's revoked, you're going to be placed back in permanent resident status, right? Because you went from there. But at that point, you're going to be sent over to immigration court. And the immigration court, then that's where the deportation proceedings. And that's only if, you don't go to jail for whatever you did. And then at immigration court, assuming that's the process that is going to be followed, you're going to be able to put up any type of deportation defense you can have. You may be able to apply for waivers, and there may be other types of immigration relief available to you. One of the ironic things, and I heard this from one of my colleagues, a New York immigration attorney, talking about Donald Trump's first wife, Ivana. And in her book, he said that she admitted that she used a false marriage to legally become a resident of Canada. She said that it wasn't a real marriage, and the couple never entered into sexual relations, but it was a fake marriage. It was a fraud, but she wanted to leave her country because of the chaos and other things that were going on there. And then from Canada, she eventually was able to obtain a tourist visa to come to the United States. And she overstayed, and that part of the history we know, and ultimately married the current president. Because she had entered with a tourist visa, she had entered legally, and Donald Trump was a citizen. He was able to adjust her status to permanent residency. Did she commit a crime that she didn't reveal? Did she commit a crime that she concealed? Did she hide a crime? Did she conceal a crime? Even though it was in another country? Was it material? Maybe it wasn't material. But if she would have never got to Canada, she would have never got to the United States. So is that the type of case the government's going to be looking at? Very interesting. And based on the situations of the individuals that I've discussed earlier, this is a very real concern. It's a very real concern for you. It's a very real concern for your family. I believe that you're going to have to be really careful when you go forward with your naturalization application. And in fact, I believe that these policies are, as I said earlier, are already being looked at. I was at a naturalization interview just a few weeks ago, and my client, I knew they were going to try to bring up the fraud issue. She had tried to become a citizen 5-6 years earlier. She had entered the country through a fiancé visa legally. She had become a conditional green card holder legally. She then became a permanent resident legally. And years later, 5-6 years later, she applied for citizenship. At that point in time, her marriage was on the rocks, although she was still living with the individual. And the government asked her some questions. And then later on, they actually went to her home and they found out that, although they were living in the same household, they weren't sleeping together. And so the government denied her citizenship. And that was many years ago. She came to my office and I said, well, we have to be prepared for that at the interview. And of course we were prepared. And at the interview, they definitely went into that area. They were going after, and then I asked them, well, where's the fraud? The fraud would have had to been committed before, either when she applied for the fiancé visa, when she applied to remove the conditions, when she applied to become a green card holder. None of those were fraudulent. It was a real bona fide legitimate marriage. So why are you rehashing old news today? I mean, why it seemed like, they were harassing my client, but she was prepared. She survived, and she was actually granted citizenship. She's now a naturalized citizen. That's the fear. Okay. That's the fear of what you could be facing going forward. I strongly encourage you to seek professional assistance if you're going to be seeking citizenship, or if you're called in to answer these types of charges, that you seek professional assistance. Don't try to do this alone. If we're going to keep the final frontier as a final frontier, people are going to have to dig in a little and make sure that they fight to the best of their ability. And with that, I just want to wish you the best of luck. If you have any questions for me, drop them in the notes below or send me an email, Carlos@Batara Immigration Law. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future tips and tidbits broadcasts that would you like me to put forward for you to explain something going on or some aspect of law, like I said, drop me a note. I'd be more than glad to answer your concerns. Anyway, take care. Talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. Know someone who might be interested in this video? Then please take a moment to like and share it with them. Also, if you would like more videos on immigration, just click on the subscribe button. And here's a little bonus, a short guide that you can download for free by clicking on the link on the description box or the square-shaped image. Plus, if you have ideas for videos you'd like to see, write a short comment below or feel free to contact me at carlos@BataraImmigrationLaw.com. My name is Carlos Batara. I appreciate your time and hopefully we'll be talking again very, very soon.